Putin had declared 2026 the year of victory in Ukraine. Throughout late 2025, he repeatedly pushed triumphant narratives from Kupiansk to Pokrovsk, demanding tangible, concrete results from his military machine. What arrived instead hit the Kremlin like a detonation. Territory lost in Zaporizhzhia. Advances stalled across Donetsk. Record casualties eroding the army faster than it could be reconstituted. This was not the trajectory Putin had planned for. The year of victory was becoming something closer to a slow-motion disaster. So the Kremlin played what it apparently believes is its last remaining card, Belarus. On paper, the logic holds. Ukraine is already stretched across a multi-front war, managing manpower shortages, ammunition constraints, and thousands of kilometers of active front line. Opening a second front from the north means striking what strategists would call Ukraine's soft underbelly, only 167 kilometers from Kyiv, along the same corridor used in 2022. The calculation seemed sound. There was one variable Putin had not adequately weighted. Ukraine had been anticipating this move since the day Russian columns retreated from the north in 2022. It has been preparing quietly, methodically, and with considerable sophistication for 4 years. The card Putin positioned as a surprise was neutralized before most of the world had even registered the threat. What follows is not speculation. It is a documented, layer-by-layer account of how a country under siege built one of the most intelligent defensive architectures in modern military history and rendered a major strategic gambit irrelevant without firing a single shot. If you want to understand how wars are actually won and lost beneath the headlines, this is worth your full attention. On April 17, 2026, following an intelligence briefing from Commander-in-Chief Syrskyi, President Zelensky formally announced that road construction and artillery position development directed toward Ukrainian territory was actively underway in Belarusian border regions. But as I read the full intelligence picture, what was happening was considerably deeper than roads and earthworks. Independent satellite imagery analysis confirms that Belarus has substantially expanded its military infrastructure in areas proximate to the Ukrainian border since 2022, constructing new facilities and access routes that are not oriented toward routine military purposes. They face directly toward Ukraine. Ukrainian Defense Intelligence additionally confirmed that Russia had established 4 Shahed drone control bases on Belarusian territory, providing stable signal architecture for attacks targeting Ukraine's northern and western corridors. And in December 2025, Lukashenko announced the deployment of the Russian-made Oreshnik ballistic missile system to Belarus, a platform whose range covers not only Ukraine, but extends to Poland and Germany. Why is Putin reaching for this lever now? Because the frontline picture has reversed on him. Since February 2026, Russia has been losing territory, not gaining it. Ukraine recaptured 480 square kilometers in the south. According to Al Jazeera reporting, March 2026 was a record casualty month for the Russian military, with 35,351 soldiers lost in a single month. In Syrskyi's own assessment, Ukraine's destruction rate is now exceeding Russia's mobilization rate. Every deadline Putin set in Donetsk and Pokrovsk has passed without result. A leader losing his grip on the battlefield tends to try to change the rules of the game. The Belarus activation is exactly that maneuver. Road construction, artillery positions, drone control centers, ballistic missile deployment, these are not separate, unrelated developments. They are components of a single integrated strategy. And that strategy comes directly from the same operational playbook as the 2022 Kyiv siege. In 2022, Russia's northern ground offensive was launched from Belarusian territory. Soldiers were deployed under the pretext of exercises. Roads were prepared. Infrastructure was framed as routine modernization. Lukashenko said Belarus would not enter the war. The result was a 60-kilometer armored convoy that became stuck in the mud and suffered devastating losses. The road from Irpin to Bucha became the most visible symbol of Russian military collapse in the entire first phase of the war. Now the Kremlin is knocking on the same door, from the same territory, in the same direction. The distance from the Belarusian border to Kyiv is still 167 kilometers. But everything that has changed since 2022 has changed in Ukraine's favor. The Ukraine-Belarus state border runs 1,084 kilometers from Volyn Oblast in the west to Chernihiv Oblast in the east. Because it served as the primary axis of the 2022 Kyiv assault, the Ukrainian military has designated this line a permanently sensitive northern front. Defending over 1,000 kilometers of border is not a straightforward proposition, but Ukraine is not pursuing a massing strategy here. It is doing something considerably more intelligent. State Border Guard Service spokesperson Demchenko stated the approach plainly in February 2026. Continuous fortification strengthening is underway along more than 1,000 kilometers of border, with all defense force components deployed in this direction. What that fortification actually means in practice is worth examining in detail, because this is where the operational picture becomes genuinely instructive. In 2022, the northern border was effectively open. No concrete barriers, no prepared trenches, no systematic minefields. Russian columns moved through that gap toward Kyiv with minimal friction. The situation today is categorically different. Ukraine's northern defense is structured across three distinct layers. The first is physical obstruction. Approach routes and critical roads have been mined. Anti-tank trenches have been excavated. Concrete barriers and reinforced fencing blocking vehicle passage have been installed. Elevated defensive positions have been established at key terrain features. The same roads along which the 60-kilometer convoy advanced in 2022 have been transformed into what I would describe as controlled death corridors. The second layer is an intelligence and early warning network. Drone surveillance runs along this border continuously, 24 hours a day. In Demchenko's words, Ukraine now has equipment capable of observing the enemy from considerably further back than the border itself. Any troop movement on the Belarusian side, any convoy formation, is detected well before it approaches the crossing. Ukraine identified the April road and position construction before Belarus's own public was aware of it, and Zelensky announced it to the world before Russian-aligned channels had framed a narrative around it. The third layer is asymmetric strike capacity. Long-range drones, electronic warfare systems, pre-calculated artillery fire coordinates, and systematic minefields that impose severe costs on any armored advance before it can develop momentum. The most strategically astute element of this entire defensive posture, in my assessment, is what Ukraine is deliberately not doing. It is not making large-scale troop redeployments to the north. Belarusian intelligence claimed in January 2026 that more than 14,000 Ukrainian soldiers were positioned at the border. But the real defensive power here is not in numbers. It is in technology density. And the reason Ukraine is not pulling major units northward is that doing so would create exactly the gap Putin is trying to engineer on the Donetsk and Pokrovsk fronts. Ukraine has identified the trap and declined to enter it. Fewer soldiers, more drones, fewer tanks, more mines, less massing, more intelligence. The counter doctrine can be distilled into three words: see, delay, strike. See every movement through drone and satellite tracking. Reconnaissance platforms patrol continuously. Electronic warfare systems monitor communications on the Belarusian side. Satellite imagery is analyzed daily. Ukraine detected the April 17th construction activity before Belarus's own population knew it was happening. Delay every advance through mines, trenches, and prepared demolitions. In 2022, Russian convoys moved from the Belarusian border toward Kyiv with almost no physical impediment. On those same routes today, every kilometer has been measured, every intersection has been addressed, every bridge has been prepared for controlled demolition. The moment an armored formation crosses the border, it will encounter layered physical obstacles and lose time at each one. And every hour lost translates directly into additional artillery and drone coordination time for Ukrainian forces. Strike every convoy with long-range drones and pre-calibrated fires. The central lesson of the 2022 Kyiv defense is this: you do not need to meet the enemy at the border to stop them. You slow them down, compress their convoys, prepare your fire coordinates, and then strike. The 60-kilometer Russian convoy collapsed in 2022 on exactly that logic. The trap waiting now is, by every measurable metric, 10 times stronger. Can Russia overcome this defense? The short answer, based on the current operational picture, is with great difficulty. Given Russia's documented personnel shortages, logistics degradation, and frontline attrition rates, opening a new ground front through Belarus would be a high-cost, low-return operation, and there is reason to believe Putin understands this, which raises the question of what the Belarus card is actually designed to accomplish. In my reading, Putin's real objective is probably not to drag Belarus into full-scale war. Lukashenko commands a force of 45,000 to 50,000 soldiers with no recent combat experience, facing an army that has been forged in the most intense land warfare environment of the 21st century. Full Belarusian military participation would likely be catastrophic for the regime. The Belarus card serves three narrower strategic functions instead. The first is forcing Ukraine to split its attention. A credible northern threat could pressure Ukraine into shifting eastern forces northward. Every unit moved north creates a potential gap in Donetsk and Pokrovsk. This is Putin's attempt to gain through strategic distraction what he cannot gain through direct combat. The second is using Belarusian territory as a strike platform. The Shahed control bases and Oreshnik missiles deployed there give Russia a geometric advantage for striking Ukraine's north and west. When Russia launches these systems from its own territory, flight distances are longer, and Ukraine's air defense coverage is more effective. From Belarus, both range shrinks and Ukrainian defense geometry becomes more complex. Even if Lukashenko's army never fires a shot, his territory is already fighting. The third function is NATO distraction. Heightened activity on the Belarusian border puts Poland, Lithuania, and the entire NATO eastern flank on elevated alert. As these countries redirect resources toward their own borders, the bandwidth available for Ukraine's support decreases. This is attrition by anxiety. There is also reporting from the presidential office indicating that Russia is considering creating a buffer zone in Ukraine's Vinnytsia region, likely through Transnistria. Belarus may not be the only pressure point being prepared in the north and southwest. Putin's overarching design in the current phase is systematic resource dispersion. Belarus in the north, Transnistria in the southwest, Donetsk in the east. Pressure from three directions serving a single purpose: the fragmentation of Ukrainian resources. Ukraine has not fallen into this trap. It has held the northern line with a technology-heavy, manpower-light posture and neutralized the intended surprise before the world had registered the threat. But for the Belarus component of this strategy to have any real teeth, one person's cooperation is required, and that person is navigating what may be the most impossible political position in the region. Lukashenko is caught between two forces that both have the capacity to destroy him. On one side, Putin. He wants Belarusian territory, is building bases, deploying missiles, and Lukashenko does not have the political latitude to refuse, because it was Putin who saved his regime during the mass protests of 2020. Hundreds of thousands of Belarusian citizens poured into the streets, rejected the election results, and came within reach of overthrowing the government. The regime survived only with direct Russian support. Since that moment, Lukashenko has been carrying a debt that Putin is now calling in. On the other side stands his own population. Support for this war across Belarusian society is, by all available indicators, extremely low. The Z symbols that proliferate in Russia are largely absent from public life in Belarus. People are not merely indifferent to this war. Many are actively opposed to it. On the same day as Zelensky's April 17th announcement, Lukashenko signed a decree conscripting reserve officers in 2026. Men under 27 are being summoned for training. Reports have circulated on Belarusian social media of fathers with multiple children and no meaningful military background being called up. A Belarusian army that has not seen combat in 4 years would be confronting a Ukrainian military that has been in continuous high-intensity warfare for the same period. Full participation would not be a military operation, it would be a catastrophe for the regime. Zelensky delivered a pointed message at precisely this moment. He noted that the nature of recent events in Venezuela should serve as a warning to the Belarusian leadership against making mistakes. The diplomatic phrasing is careful. The underlying message is not. Dictatorships do not have guaranteed lifespans. Lukashenko is facing two paths, and both lead toward disaster. Comply with what Putin demands, and the regime faces internal collapse. Refuse and face Putin's response. There is no clean exit from this position. The preparations in Belarus have not only put Ukraine on alert, they have activated the broader regional security architecture. Poland is fortifying over 200 kilometers of its Belarusian border under the East Shield program. Lithuania has established a joint defense arrangement with Poland to protect the Suwałki corridor. NATO is maintaining continuous surveillance of the region with AWACS aircraft. And here is what I consider the deeper irony embedded in Putin's Belarus strategy. By activating this front, he is spreading Russia's already depleted resources even further. New roads, new positions, new bases, new missile deployments, all of these carry costs. And while Russia's economic capacity is under severe pressure from fuel revenue losses and sanctions, financing every new front becomes progressively harder. While Ukrainian drones are destroying Russian refineries and reducing export revenue, Putin is simultaneously building new infrastructure in Belarus, revenue falling, expenditure rising. Every door Putin opens in search of an exit pulls him slightly deeper into the structural trap. The pattern across 4 years is consistent. Putin sent more soldiers. They were attrited. He launched more missiles. Stocks depleted. He could not achieve battlefield decision. Could not sustain economic stability. In 2022, he marched on Kyiv. Failed. In 2023, he planned a summer offensive. It did not hold. In 2024, he attempted to win through raw manpower. Drones stopped him. In 2025, he deployed electronic warfare at scale. Ukraine developed signal-independent drone systems. And now in 2026, the Belarus card. What I find analytically significant about this sequence is not just the failure of each individual initiative. It is what each failure reveals about the decision-maker. A strong strategic position does not require dragging reluctant allies into a war they do not want. Resorting to that lever is a signal, not of strength, but of a narrowing set of options. Ukraine, which has absorbed and countered every one of these moves across 4 years, has already demonstrated it is prepared for this one as well. 1,084 kilometers of border fortified. A 3-layer defense built and tested. The see delay strike doctrine deployed at scale. Every movement is being tracked. Every preparation is being monitored. Every threat is being addressed before it fully materializes. Lukashenko faces a choice, with no good outcome. Comply with Putin and fight against his own people. Refuse and face the consequences from Moscow. And Zelensky's Venezuela reference is not fading from the conversation. If this breakdown gave you a clearer picture of how the Northern Front actually works beneath the surface, share it with someone still reading the headlines. And if you want analysis that goes into the mechanics rather than just the map, follow along. There is considerably more to unpack.